Hello, welcome back to Knitting Nicely. I'm Danielle, your knitting coach. Today we're going to dive right in to working on your very first square for your knitted patchwork quilt. This square is perfect for beginners because it is simply knitted squares or knitted stitches and purl stitches, and it's just done in a pattern that makes this nice texture. This is called the double moss stitch. You can see here on this shawl, this is called a single moss stitch. And it's slightly different here. It's a little bit bigger. It's called a double moss stitch. Super easy. It's gonna be lots of fun making your first square. So we're gonna dive right in, and the first thing that you'll need is you're gonna have to have some stitches already cast onto your needle. You're gonna need a size US 10 needle, and you're gonna need 54 stitches cast onto that needle before you're ready to go. So if you haven't done that yet, go back and watch how to cast on with a long tail cast on. I'll put the link in the description on how to do that. And then I'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay, so now you've got your 54 stitches onto your size US 10 knitting needle. And I always like to give my stitches one last count before I start, because who knows, maybe I accidentally counted wrong. So here we go. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, 46, 48, 50, 52, 54. Yay, I counted correctly. Okay, so now we've done our long tail cast on, and we're ready to start our first square with the double moss stitch. So we're going to turn our work around. Make sure that that is going here. We know where the tail is for the yarn, and we know where the tail is for the end. Okay, we don't want to use the end. We want to use the live part of our yarn, part that goes to the ball. Okay, so then we've got our yarn coming down this way. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slip that stitch purlwise with my yarn in front, and that will give the edge of my work a nice finished look to it. It will look like it's braided because I'm slipping that first stitch. And I'm just going to slip it off the needle. I'm going to give that a little tug so it doesn't come undone. Okay, and then my first stitch is going to be a purl stitch. So I slip my needle through the front of this stitch, wrap my yarn around it, and pull it through. Congratulations, you finished your first stitch. Now we're going to move our working yarn to the back, and then we're going to knit 2 stitches. So here's the first one. Put your needle through that stitch towards the back, wrap the yarn around. Sometimes I grab the yarn with my forefinger of my right hand just to keep it from slipping off as I pull down and through. Slip that old stitch off. You have your new stitch on your right needle. I'm going to do that again. That's called a knit stitch. I'm going to put the needle through the front of the stitch to the back. You can see that? Goes through the front to the back. Wrap your yarn around the needle. Kind of hold it with your forefinger so it doesn't slip off. Pull it through. Let the old stitch go off the left needle, and your right needle has the new stitch. So we've got a slip stitch, we did a purl stitch, and then we did 2 knit stitches. Okay, now we need to change again because a moss stitch goes back and forth from knitting and purling. So we're going to move this working yarn to the front. Guess what that means? That means we're doing a purl stitch, and we're going to do 2 purl stitches. So that means we're going to put our right needle down through the front of the stitch, wrap our yarn around it, pull it through, That's the new stitch. That's the old stitch, so slip the old stitch off. And we're going to do that again. It's a purl stitch. Go down through the front, wrap your needle around, pull it through. Take the old stitch off the left needle, and you've got your new stitch on the right needle. Now if you look over here, this is something I always teach. Make sure you look at your work so you start to recognize which stitches look like what. So we can see from this, that's our slip stitch, the beginning one. You see this little bump here? I know that's a purl stitch because of that little bump. Now you can see just barely these two little V's. Let me get a pencil so I can use it as a pointer. These little V's right here tell me that I just knit that stitch. Here's another little V. That way I know that I've knit 2 stitches. And look here. Here's another bump, and here's another bump. That means I know that these 2 stitches were purled. Okay, so the rest of this row is the same thing over and over. We're going to do 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, all the way to the end. And you should end with your second purl stitch. Okay, so let's work on some of those together some more, just so you can see it again. And if you ever need to pause this video while it's playing and just kind of work on a stitch so that you get used to it and go slow, it's always better to go slow and go right than to go fast and do it sloppy. So better to do it right and slow. Don't worry, you'll get faster with time. So we're gonna do, we've just finished, look at our work, we've just finished 2 purl stitches because we know what it looks like. That means, according to our pattern, we gotta do 2 knit stitches. Knit stitches go from the front to the back, wrap around the yarn, hold it with your finger if you need to, pull it through, slip off the old stitch, and you've got your new. Do it again. Knit stitch. Go through the front to the back. You can see that it's going through that old stitch. And wrap around the yarn. Hold it with your finger if you want to. Pull it through. Slip the old stitch off. Okay, now, what do you think the next stitch needs to be since we have 2 knit stitches? According to the pattern, we're doing 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl. So we know, since we see these 2 knit stitches, then the next 2 stitches are purl stitches. So the first thing we need to do is move our working yarn to the front of our work so that we can make those purl stitches. And then a purl stitch goes from through the front of the stitch instead of the back of the stitch like a knit. The purl goes through the front. Go through the front, wrap the yarn around, pull it through. You've got your new stitch over here and your old stitch here. Let's do that again. Yarn in front, needle goes through the front, wrap the yarn around, pull the new stitch through. Take the old stitch off. Okay, now we've got knit stitches, so we need to bring the working yarn to the back again. Do a knit stitch. You go in through the front and to the back. Wrap the yarn around, pull it through, take the old stitch off. Through the front to the back. Sometimes your stitches are a little tight, that's okay. Work through it. Wrap the yarn around, pull it to the front, slip the old stitch off. Got 2 knit stitches, that means purl is next. Sometimes you have to push your needle or your stitches up so that you have them ready to go. Okay, we're going to do purl stitches. That means pull your yarn to the front, go down to the front of that stitch, wrap the yarn around, and pull it to the back. You got your new stitch. Old stitch slips off. Okay, now sometimes the purl stitch is a little bit tricky to work when you're brand new to knitting and purling, because it's awkward to have that yarn around your finger like that. But don't worry, with practice and muscle memory and muscle strength, you'll start to get it, and it'll just become second nature, and you'll be able to go really fast. So we're gonna put that yarn around, go through, take the old one off. Now I see 2 bumps. That means I know that my next 2 stitches are knit stitches again. We're gonna go a little bit faster, but you don't have to yet. You can keep on working at your own pace, and when you're ready and have finished the entire row of knit 2, purl 2, or if you need to rewind and watch it in slow, go ahead and do that. But when you're done with all those knit 2, purl 2s, and you're all the way at the end of your row, then we will start the next row. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish off this row. I'll probably speed up the video so that you don't have to sit and wait if you are already done. Okay, so we are to the end of the row, and as you can see, I just finished my last 2 knit stitches. You can see the little V's, and on this one you can see the little purls. 2 purls, 2 V's. Now I know my last 2 are 2 purls, so I'm just gonna go ahead and work those. Purl, purl. Okay, we just finished our first row of your first square. Super exciting. Now we're going to turn our work over, because even though this is a circular needle, we use it as if it's 2 straight needles. If you're using 2 straight needles, it's obvious, but with a circular needle, you need to go back and forth between the 2 sides. So we're going to flip our work over like this. And the first thing we're going to do again is we're going to slip a stitch. Now when I slip a stitch, I usually slip it as if I was going to do the next stitch in the pattern. And my next stitch in my pattern is actually going to be a knit stitch. Okay, so I'm going to slip it with that yarn in the back. I'm not going to work the stitch, I'm just slipping it from one needle to the other needle. So I'm slipping it like that. And it's actually slipped as a purl stitch, because when you purl, you go through the top in the front, and then you slip it off if it's a slip stitch. But I'm holding my yarn in the back because this stitch would be a knit stitch if I was doing the pattern. Okay, I hope that's clear. We'll work on it as we go, and you'll see the difference between the 2 kinds of slip stitches. Okay, so next thing is we're going to do a knit stitch, because this is our second row, and our second row is just knitting the knit stitches and purling the purl stitches. So if you can see your work, you know that this is a knit stitch, this is a knit stitch, so I'm gonna knit the next stitch. And now these are 2 purl stitches, so I'm gonna purl into them. Bring the yarn to the front, go around, purl stitch. Whoops, slipped right off of there. Okay, now you can see these 2 are knit stitches, so I'm gonna knit into them. Because the second row just does exactly what you see. If you see knit stitches, you knit them. If you see purl stitches, you purl them. Okay, so let's go. 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches. Okay, well, I am going to speed up the video, and why don't you go ahead and pause it so that you can finish your row. And then when you're ready and you've got only a few stitches left on that row, go ahead and start it back up, and we will move on to the 3rd row. Okay, we're at the end of our row. We've got all these stitches on here already. Now it's time to knit our last 2 stitches. Knit and I always give a little tug to the little tail at the beginning just to give it a nice little snugness at the beginning. Okay, so we've done 2 rows. Now it's time to flip it over and start the 3rd row. 3rd row is different than the 2nd row. We are not going to be doing the same as we see. We're going to be doing the opposite of what we see. So I see 2 purl stitches here. That means I need to knit those 2 stitches. Okay, so we're going to, since that's a purl, I'm going to slip it this way, slip it off, and I'm going to move my yarn to the back because I need to knit the next stitch. But I needed to purl it as a slip purl so that this little braid stays nice. Okay, so let's do that again. These are 2 purl stitches. If I slip this way, I'll have a little bump there on the end, and I don't want that bump. I want to have a nice braided look. So I don't do it that way. I leave my yarn in front to slip that stitch. You see? So now you can see the edge is staying a nice braid. Okay? So this is a purl stitch. So in the 3rd row, I need to knit my purl stitches. So I knit it. Now I see 2 knit stitches. My 3rd row, I'm told to purl those stitches because they are knit underneath. So I knit on the other side. Or I actually purled them, but on this side you can see that the knit pattern. So that means I need to purl them. So it's the opposite. I'm going to purl them. Purl, purl. Now you can see the bumps. There's 2 rows of knits. I'll show you with my pencil. You can see 1 knit row, number 2 knit row, and now there's a purl row. Those little bumps show purls. Okay. So here's purls. That means I need to knit them. Knit, knit. Here's some more knits, so I need to purl them. Purl, purl. And I go all the way down my entire row, taking note, keeping careful watch of what I'm doing. If I see a knit stitch, I purl it. If I see a purl stitch, I knit it. Okay, let's go all the way down that row and work our way through it. Being careful to always do the opposite of what you see on this 3rd row. And I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so now we're at the end of row 3. And we have knit the purl stitches and we have purled the knit stitches. We have 2 more stitches on the end. You can see that they're purls, so we're going to knit them. Whoa! Hey, this happens a lot. Don't panic. You can see the little loops and you can slip your needle right back onto them. All right, so we're gonna knit those stitches. Knit, knit. There you go. Now you can already see this little braid happening on the end. You see that? Isn't that pretty? Okay, so let's keep that braid going. We're going to turn our work and start row 4. This is the 4th row in the pattern, and in this pattern there's only 4 rows that just repeat themselves over and over and over again for the entire height of the square. So, okay, so what? Oh, look at this. Look, I see purl bumps. Now row 4, you purl the purls and knit the knits. You're looking at it and doing the same thing that you see again. That's a lot like row 2. Okay, so to keep this nice little braid, I'm not going to have this yarn in the back because if I do, it'll give me a bump on the edge, and I don't want that bump. I want my edge to look pretty so that it's actually easier to sew my squares together. So I'm going to move the yarn to the front and slip it with the yarn in front. And then I will do my purl straight from there. Okay, there you go. See? Nice little braid on the side. We've got our 2 purl stitches done. Now we have 2 knit stitches, so we gotta knit them. Row 4 is to do what you see. So purl, purl, knit, knit. Here's 2 knit, gonna knit them. Whoop. 2 purl, gotta purl them. Purl, purl. 2 knit, gotta knit them. Ooh. Knit, knit. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of this row, and you can pause this and finish yours. When you're done, come back here and hit play again, and we'll finish up our pattern. Okay, we're done with our row. And we have 2 more stitches left. I just knit these 2, and I can see purl bumps on here, so I know that my next 2 stitches, or my last 2 stitches, are purls. Purl, purl. Okay, there you go. You can already see that nice little moss stitch happening. See where you see these little squares of purl stitches and knit stitches. Purl, knit, purl. And that's what you're going to do the entire length of your, or height of your square. It'll just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you need to make sure that the height of your square is going to be the same as the width of your square. This is about 12 inches. It doesn't have to be like super precise exact, because when you go to block it, you'll block it to the exact 12 inches width and height. And the reason it needs to be exactly 12 inches is because when you go to sew it together, all the blocks should be the same size. So here's a little block that I already finished for this first square, and you can see how nice the texture is. It's got the purls, the little purl bumps, and it's also got the little knit bumps, or not knit bumps, knit V's. I like to call them knit V's. Okay, that's what your square will look like when it's done. It should have a nice even texture all across the entire thing. Okay, so once you are done and you've got all of your rows, I believe if you have the same gauge as me, you will probably end up with 74 rows. That's what I ended up with. 74 rows. So when you are done with your 74th row, come back and watch the bind off video so that you know how to bind off and get this nice little braid look on your bind off. And this little braid will make it super easy to sew your let me see, this is the side of it. You can see the little braid going on. This little braid will make it super easy to sew all of your squares together to make that big, beautiful blanket. Alrighty. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the bind off video. Bye for now, and happy knitting. Okay, so you just finished your first square. How exciting! Yay! Congratulations! Okay, so let's review what you learned. You learned how to do a slip stitch, and you learned where to put the yarn, whether it be in the front or the back, depending on where you are in the pattern, so that it makes the nice little edge on your work, like this. You learned how to do a knit stitch and how to keep that yarn in the back so that you can do the knit stitch. You learned a purl stitch and how to have the yarn in the front when you do the purl stitch. You learned how to read your work, which is super important. That's like the most important thing about knitting, is being able to see the knit V's and see the purl bumps when you knit so that you know just by looking at your work if you've done it right or if you've done it wrong, or if you need to take some stitches out. You know what comes next in your pattern because you can see what you have already done. It's just a really important thing to be able to do, is read your work. Okay, yeah, you've learned that. Awesome. And then the next step is to learn how to bind off so your square can be completely finished. Okay, so if you don't know how to bind off, I will teach you how to do that in another video, and I will drop the link in the bottom in the description. So you'll have two links. You'll have a link to cast on, and you'll have a link to bind off in the description, so they're easy for you to find. I hope you had lots of fun, and I will see you in the next video. Happy knitting! Bye for now!